We got a little more clarity on the bullpen competition yesterday after Philly teed off on Anderson Pilar. Let's talk about it. Yes, welcome on in to Braves Today for Friday, March 14th. Your source of news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Crosby Baseball. You can follow the show on Twitter, Braves_today. We have a Facebook page and an Instagram as well. And you can find all of my written work, bravestoday.com. That's the Braves Today Substack, as this is both a podcast and a newsletter. The team's made a couple roster moves recently. We'll get to those in the third segment. I did put out a pretty lengthy newsletter on Friday about Orlando Arcia. I can't believe we're doing 2 segments on Orlando Arcia in 2 consecutive days. But first, I want to talk about yesterday's spring training game because we got a little clarity on the bullpen competition. We've been talking about which NRIs would make the team and how you configure the bullpen. Do you send Angel Perdomo on rehab? Do you option Daysbel Hernandez back to the minors? And one of the big, I'm going to call it elephants in the room, but really just stopping points on making a decision on your NRIs has been Rule 5 pick Anderson Pilar. Because he's looked pretty good early in spring. You got him from Miami. He's pitched 4 2/3 innings, 6 hits, 3 walks, but only 2 runs allowed and 10 strikeouts. So, couple issues in the profile, like it's a whip of 1.929, which is obviously not great. And he was going to get a really good test on Thursday facing Philadelphia. It's a bullpen game for Atlanta on the road in, I think it's Clearwater is where the Phillies do spring training. It's a nice ballpark. I've been there. It's a nice ballpark. And it didn't go well for Anderson Pilar. I'm not laughing out of mocking his struggles. I'm laughing because that's all you can really do in this kind of situation. Facing an MLB lineup, Turner, Harper, Bohm, Schwarber, Real Muto, that was the lineup for Philly. Anderson Pilar was officially charged with 7 runs on 4 hits and 3 walks in 1 inning. Now, it's actually a little bit more complicated than that because of the rule in spring where you can leave a game and then come back in. He left with 2 outs in the first and came back and got an out in the second before being lifted. But because he only got 3 outs in the box score, he's credited with 1 inning, even though he got outs in 2 different innings. Spring only kind of thing. And to me, this kind of solidified the decision by Atlanta that Anderson Pilar is not going to be on your opening day roster. So let's talk about what happened, why we should have seen this coming, and what Atlanta's options are now. And in the actual game, this was a struggle. Trey Turner homered to lead off the game. It was, I think it was a 1-2 count. He got ahead 0-2 early. And then he left a slider in the zone and Trey Turner popped it for a home run. Felt like a spring training home run. Ball was hit at 93, 94 miles an hour, but it got out. And it got out barely. 337 feet. It barely got out, but it got out. And then from there, he ended up allowing a cycle to Philly. Homer, he walked Bryce Harper, doubled Alec Bohm, struck out Kyle Schwarber, which not the hardest thing in the world to do. JT Realmuto hit a triple, which made it 3-0. He got an RBI ground out from Max Kepler. They lifted him. Okay. Austin Smith comes in, ends the inning. Second inning, after Atlanta puts up a run, Connor Capel hit a triple. Nice play. Pilar comes back in, gets Brandon Marsh on a strikeout looking, walks Oscar Mercado, walks Trey Turner, gives up an RBI single to Bryce Harper. So there's 5 runs right there. There's your cycle, right? You've had the triple, the double, the home run, and the single. They lift Pilar for Jonathan Hughes. And after a ground out, Kyle Schwarber homers. So those last 2 runs, the 2 runners on base, get tagged to Pilar, there's your 7 runs. And in retrospect, again, maybe a thing we should have saw coming, okay? Because again, 2 runs in 4 2/3 innings entering this game. And this is a thing you can only see in spring. If you go to Baseball Reference, and I love that they do this, if you go to Baseball Reference to a player's individual page, they have 2025 spring training. It's above their normal stat register. It's obviously, it's only there in spring. They keep this information. I don't know where it goes after spring. It's probably in a tab somewhere. And it's the standard stat line like you're used to seeing for a pitcher: win, loss, ERA, games, all of that good stuff. Strikeouts, walks, whatever. And at the very end, there's a field that you only see in spring. And it's abbreviated, but it's opponent quality. And this is where Baseball Reference looks at the level that every player you faced in this game. If you're a pitcher, it's every hitter. If you're a hitter, it's the pitchers you receive pitches from. They go in here and they score every single player that you faced in the previous season, 1 through 10. So, since he's a pitcher, let's look at the opposing batters, right? If you're facing a pitcher who has to hit for some reason, which doesn't happen in spring anymore, it's a 1. If you were in the major leagues last year, that guy's a 10. And everything else is in a range. If you were in high A, it's a 5. If you were in double A, it's a 7. If you were in triple A, it's an 8. If you were in rookie ball, it's somewhere between 1.5 to 3. Single A is a 4, right? They have a whole grading system. And they take every player that you face and get the average score, and that is what's in Baseball Reference. Anderson Pilar, going into yesterday's game, he had faced 23 batters. The average score was 6.7, which on their scale is just below double A quality. So most of Anderson Pilar's outings in spring have been later in spring training games. It's a lot of minor leaguers. It's a lot of career backups. It's a lot of guys who are not right now major leaguers, who were not major leaguers last year, probably won't be major leaguers this year, might not ever be major leaguers. And that was why, and in retrospect, I should have seen in the game notes that Pilar was going to start and giving you guys a heads up. Hey, this could be ugly on Thursday, because it's really the first time he's faced a major league lineup in spring training, because he was the starter for the bullpen game on the road. Because again, he faced all major leaguers. He faced Phillies A lineup. And Anderson Pilar allowed 7 runs on 4 hits and 3 walks with 2 strikeouts, gave up a home run, and got 3 total outs in the, how many batters did he face? He faced 10 batters and got 3 outs across 2 innings, right? So what does Atlanta do now? This is a situation where he's a Rule 5 pick. If he doesn't make the roster all year, like doesn't stay on the Major League roster all year, you have to offer his rights back to Miami. There's potential here, right? I am confident that Anderson Pilar will be a major leaguer. It just won't be for the Atlanta Braves in 2025. If this situation was reversed, right? If Miami claimed Anderson Pilar in the Rule 5 draft from Atlanta, there is zero reason Miami would not be able to just keep Anderson Pilar on the roster all year and see if they could make him into a major league reliever by giving him time in blowouts. There's going to be plenty of those against Miami. And giving him major league innings, because they're not expected to contend this year. They might lose 100 games. The Braves are not in that situation. So you don't have to give him back. I think the Reds have now given back a player in the Rule 5 draft. They were, I think, one of the first ones to give a guy back in spring already. The likelihood here is that Anderson Pilar goes back to the Marlins. But there is the possibility, there is the option to make a small trade to get his full rights from Miami, right? I'm assuming it wouldn't need to be much. I don't think they do it for cash considerations, but some sort of lower level guy that you're not going to keep that they might think has potential or something. And in essence, the rest of Anderson Pilar's rights and the Rule 5 restrictions come off if you make that trade. And then you're under the standard rules. You can option him down. He's never been on the 40-man roster until now. He hasn't popped an option yet. The whole reason he's Rule 5 eligible was he never went on a 40-man roster. So you can option him down, and you could have up to 3 years of control of him in the minors to try and see if you can figure out how to get him the rest of the way figured out into a major league reliever. Again, I think there's quality here. I really do. It's just a question of when can you get this? Like, when can you get this kind of figured out? Side note in this game, Ineal de los Santos came in the bottom of the 4th and 3 straight strikeouts. Alec Boehm, Kyle Schwarber, JT Realmuto was savage. Looked really good. Came back out for a second inning. He allowed 2 hits and a walk. Gave up a home run. I think it was Brandon Marsh, maybe? No, Bryson Stott homered. He got a ground out of Max Kepler. Bryson Stott homered. He walked Brandon Marsh, gave up a single, and then an RBI ground out before getting Harper to fly out. So De Los Santos looked good in his first inning, but not his second. We probably should, at some point in time in the future, should talk about Ineal de los Santos maybe making the roster as another one of those NRIs back there. He's probably battling with Hector Neris. If Neris looks good enough to start the year in the majors, that may be the De Los Santos spot. But either way, impressive outing, the first inning of it, from Ineal de los Santos. In just a minute, something came up yesterday when we talked Orlando Arcia versus Nick Allen. And there's this idea, for some reason, this wrong idea about Orlando Arcia's defense. And I want to get to that next, right here on Braves Today. Welcome back into Braves Today. Lindsay Crosby talking about just the news and notes from Atlanta Braves camp, right? 3 kind of smaller subjects here in today's show. Thank you guys for being here with us all week. Again, there was no show on Tuesday. We're probably at the point now, we're so close to the season starting, that's probably not going to happen anymore, right? My last chances here to take a day off here and there and then get back after it. So probably doing at least 1 show a day all the way through the end of the season. I say at least because we do have a plan. We'll talk about this later, but we do have a plan to do some post-game stuff, right? Certain games, not all of them, especially if I'm in the press box. It's really hard to get in front of you guys for a show if I'm in the press box. But doing a lot of some post-game stuff on notable games, and we'd announce it ahead of time and things like that. On yesterday's show, one of the early comments that was left was talking about Orlando Arcia versus Nick Allen. And said, quote, Arcia is an elite defender, but I wouldn't have a problem with Allen getting the nod because it might light a fire under Arcia. And I felt compelled, for some reason, to clarify that Orlando Arcia is not an elite defender. I'll say it again, louder. Orlando Arcia is not an elite defender. Okay. There's Orlando Arcia's value on defense is not being an elite defender because he's not. Okay. Look at run value. This is on StatCast. Fielding run value. Looking at every player and how good they do on defense at their position based on innings played and all of that. Arcia has a +6 run value at short over the last 2 years. He's played 2,591 innings at short. This is an accumulation stat. The more you play, the higher or lower your run value can get. He is solidly above average. I'm not disputing that he is effective defensively. He's not elite. Okay, if you look at last year's numbers, there were 21 qualified shortstops, which was, I forget the exact criteria, but I want to say it was like minimum 750 innings at short. Orlando Arcia was 10th at +3. And when you look at the chart, and if you want to see all these visuals, by the way, bravestoday.com, that was today's newsletter. So go check it out. Surprisingly long. There's a group of elite defenders, 5 or 6 guys that are in the double digits on run value. Dansby Swanson, plus 13. He was the best defensive shortstop in baseball by run value. Every metric's a little different. By run value, he was the best shortstop in baseball. Francisco Lindor, plus 12. Bobby Witt Jr., plus 12. Ezequiel Tovar of the Rockies, plus 11. Ellie De La Cruz, plus 11. Anthony Volpe, plus 10. And then there's a drop-off. And you get to a group of guys that are all hovering around 3 or 4. And this is your second tier of shortstops. Brian Rocchio of the Guardians, plus 4. Corey Seager of the Rangers, plus 4. Mason Wynn of the Cardinals, plus 4. Ha-Seong Kim of the Padres, plus 3. Orlando Arcia, plus 3. And then there's another drop-off, and you get to the guys who are all hovering around 0 or slightly negative. Willy Adames at 0. Gunnar Henderson at -1. O'Neal Cruz at -1. He got moved to center field later in the year. Trey Turner, -2. Trey Turner's not a good defensive shortstop. That's a terrible contract. Braves fans need to know that is an awful contract. He's already a negative defender at shortstop. He's not running like he used to. And he decided to wait to start hitting until August 2 years ago or last year or whatever it was. That is not a good contract, and it's going to come back to hurt the Phillies. He's going to need to be a second baseman or an outfielder within a couple years. It's going to age almost as bad as Xander Bogaerts' deal has aged. Anyway, yeah, Jeremy Pena, Zach Neto, we're all down there. And then there's 50 feet of crap, to borrow a phrase from Moneyball. And then there's CJ Abrams at -13. Fun fact, over half of his career errors while he's been in Washington have been against the Braves. He's a local kid. I think he gets the yips when he plays Atlanta. But I dove more into the defense. I'm like, okay, how is this working? And for the record, that's a similar trend to 2023. He was also 10th there. He was at 3 outs above average, or 3 fielding run value in 2023, which was 10th. And he had Xander Bogaerts was right behind him. Miguel Rojas was above him. Francisco Lindor was above him. Dansby Swanson led baseball again with 15. Similar trend to 23 and 24. So it's not like anything's weird there. And again, he's worked so many more innings than a lot of those guys. Corey Seager beat him despite only having less than 1,000 innings. And Arcia had 1,300. There you go. And I dove into the components of this. I'm trying to figure out how he's good defensively, right? Because he's good. Don't get me wrong. He's not great. He's not elite, but he's good. And he gets good marks on his range, which is funny because Orlando Arcia is slow. When you pull up the sprint speed and StatCast, and caveat on this is the sprint speed and StatCast is measured when they're running the bases, not when they're running in the field. So caveat there, but speed is speed, right? Orlando Arcia last year had a lower sprint speed than Travis d'Arnaud, than Marcell Ozuna, and then Jorge Soler. If it was a foot race, you would rather have Marcell Ozuna than Orlando Arcia. 13th percentile speed in baseball. And the range is a combination of things. One, I think it's some really good reactions. He may be closer to elite when it comes to the reactions, right? That initial first step, the read off the bat and all of that. Not a thing that we're quantifying publicly on StatCast yet. Some teams may have this info, but we're not quantifying this publicly yet. And then his positioning is really interesting. He's a little bit of a shallow defender, right? The league average is like 149 feet from home plate. RC is 147. Javi Baez is the shallowest defender in baseball at 145. Dansby Swanson's the deepest. He plays at like 151 feet, which is funny because his arm's also not that strong, but he makes it work. But when Orlando Arcia is shaded towards second base, like when there's a lefty up to hit and things like that, he's one of the deepest shortstops in baseball. And I think that's really the key. He doesn't have great foot speed, but because he's farther away from home plate, like the shallowest player is at 142 and he's at 147. 5 feet doesn't feel like a lot, but it's an extra half second when this ball's rolling up the middle or whatever. He's able to get to balls. He has an extra half second to get to a ball that if he was playing shallow, he wouldn't be able to get to, right? His arm, they talk a lot about his arm being strong. Despite that, it's never been additive to his defense. In his career, he's added +1 fielder runs in his entire career off of his arm strength. And most of that's just runners not taking extra bases on him. There's an estimated advance rate on StatCast, which is given the batted ball direction, the speeds, everybody involved, how frequently they think you should be advancing to another base. The estimated advance rate against him is 38% for his career, and the actual advance rate is 30%. So there's some respect there from opposing teams. But even that's a little misleading because last year, he was 2% worse than estimated. He's being buoyed a lot by his early career numbers. End of the day, Orlando Arcia's defensive value is he's reliable. He makes the routine plays that you are supposed to make. For those of you who don't know this, before I started covering the Braves, I was covering the Auburn Tigers college baseball team. And I still go to their games. I still go to the media availabilities and do interviews with players and things like that on a freelance basis for a podcast that I do. I have 3 podcasts, guys. I'm the content daddy here is what my friends call me. Something that Auburn University head coach Butch Thompson says, dominate the routine play, right? It's more importantly than making the amazing SportsCenter highlights is just being reliable and making the plays you're supposed to make. On defense, that is what Orlando Arcia is. He makes the routine play that you need him to make. But he's not elite. He's not adding exceptional defensive value. He's reliable and consistent defensively. The issue you have is that is fine when you are batting 239 or 240, you're putting up 15 home runs, and you're reliable every day. It's not okay when you're batting 048 with runners on third and less than 2 outs. It's not okay when you're batting 155 with runners in scoring position. Or you're batting 067 with runners on first and third. I legitimately think maybe you see Nick Allen rotating a little bit. We talked yesterday. There's not really any power upside with Nick Allen. Even if you fix his ability to pull the ball in the air and all of that, you still don't necessarily get a lot of power production out of him. But because Orlando Arcia is reliable defensively, he still has a job, and he's going to have a job, right? They would probably, unless his offense cratered to where he hit 120 this year, they probably would be okay with putting him in the lineup for 2026, picking up his club option for $2 million. Exceptional value for a reliable defender at shortstop. But you've got to figure out shortstop. And the hard part of this is you're not picking high enough in the draft to get a stud college shortstop who could be up in a year and a half. Taking a prep shortstop would put them on the same time frame as a lot of your existing lower level shortstops. Your John Gill, your Perdomos, your guys who are in the low minors right now who look promising at shortstop. Taking a prep shortstop would just add another guy to that group in that same time frame. And then signing a shortstop in free agency would take more than you've been willing to spend in recent years. I pulled every shortstop contract of $29 million or more in the last couple seasons. And every single one of them was either a free agency signing over $22 million a year. Dansby Swanson, Willie Adames, Carlos Correa, Xander Bogaerts, Bobby Witt Jr., Trey Turner. Or it was under $22 million a year, which is Atlanta's roughly self-imposed cap, but it was an extension. So it was a guy you already had control of. Andre Jimenez, Ezekiel Tovar, Tommy Edman, who you could have traded for, Gerardo Perdomo, Nico Horner, Bo Bichette, right? Or it was a mega deal in the case of Bobby Witt Jr. Or it was a guy with an opt-out in Ha-Seong Kim who was injured. This upcoming free agency class, Ha-Seong Kim could opt out. He could be in there. Bo Bichette could be in there. But odds are, anybody who's a two-way offensive shortstop is going to cost you more than $22 million a year. Is that the position you're finally willing to go over that self-imposed limit for? I don't know. In just a minute, Braves made a couple more moves out of camp. We'll break that down next, right here on Braves Today. Final segment of Braves Today. Lindsay Crosby kind of covering some of the news of the week that we didn't necessarily get to. Two roster moves made by the Braves in recent days. They sent Dylan Covey, the reliever, and Charles LeBlanc, the infielder, down to minor league camp. The timing of LeBlanc, that was done shortly after Nick Allen came back, so it really feels like he was kept in major league camp as a depth option to give them another infielder while Allen was unavailable. Again, we never got any sort of confirmation about an actual injury for Allen. It's easy to assume he was nicked up a little bit because he didn't play for a week, but LeBlanc was moved down because of that. Dylan Covey was the next logical move in narrowing down all the different NRIs in camp, in the bullpen. 6 2/3 innings across 4 appearances, 0-1 record. He did take a loss somewhere, 4.05 ERA. 5 hits, 3 runs. He did give up a homer, 3 walks to 3 strikeouts. So strikeout rate wasn't really there. Walked as much as he struck out. All things we know the team doesn't necessarily love. And I've discussed this before and just been passing. We're not going to go deep into it now. I'll probably do a newsletter maybe early next week, maybe over the weekend. I'm trying to get clarification on if they can retain Dylan Covey in the organization or not. He was not on a major league roster last year, to my knowledge. So he's not an XXB free agent where he has an automatic opt-out. But I don't know. I'm assuming it was a minor league deal and they can keep him in the organization. There's not an opt-out date. So once I get confirmation of that, we're going to publish a newsletter about why I think and how I think you could convert Dylan Covey to a starter. It reminds me, he's not the same pitcher. I'm not saying this, but his visual profile, all right, not the arm angle, but the stuff reminds me a lot of how Chris Sale works a lot east to west, right? A lot of Braves pitchers are vertical pitchers. You throw a fastball up in the zone, you got a slider or a curveball off of it. Think about Strider, think about Ronaldo Lopez. Max Fried was a great example of this because he had the curveball dropping down off of a fastball and stuff. Dylan Covey, just like Chris Sale, is working side to side. In 23, when he was in the majors, sinker, cutter, slider, splitter, sweeper, changeup. A lot of stuff that moves side to side, not a lot of stuff that drops below the zone. I think he's a candidate for a conversion to the rotation because he has 6 different options. I do think you can tweak some stuff here based on his arm angle. He's 50-something degrees. So he's not an extreme sidearm guy, which is typically where you see those east to west profiles come in. I think he's a candidate. I'd be curious to see trying to give him a curveball. He threw one back in 2020. That's the last time we really have major league data for him, and he scrapped that after 2020. I'd be curious to see, would they consider giving him a curveball back to give him something that drops vertically based off of his motor preferences and things like that. A lot of people get frustrated when we talk about converting a reliever to a starter. And they're like, why? If they're an okay reliever, just keep him as a reliever. And I think 2 things is, 1, he's been in the majors 1 season since 2020. It's hard to argue he is an okay reliever, right? He hasn't started since 2019. But 2, it's inherently more valuable to get a reliever. To get a starter because of the innings. Alex Anthopoulos has talked about this, and I'm going to go, in that article, I'm going to go find I have the quote somewhere in one of these saved and recorded media availabilities where he talks about the cost of innings in free agency for starters is so expensive. That's why people signed a 41-year-old Charlie Morton for $15 million because he's made 30-plus starts every year the last 4. So converting Dylan Covey to the rotation, and it's not like you're guaranteed to give him a spot, right? You would have him in Gwinnett in the rotation, be working on that. You could call him up. You could stick him back in the pen. You could make him your long man out of the pen where say, hey, you can take 3 or 4, and then if we're going to need a spot start coming up, we can just not throw you for a couple days, and then you can go on 4 days rest and give us a 5-inning spot start or whatever. Think about what they did with Grant Holmes. Was a starter turned reliever that they stashed in Gwinnett. They helped him figure it out, and now we're talking about him as the number 4 and a guy that we expect to be a dog this year. Dylan Covey possibly could be that. So that's what I want to see. Again, I'm trying to confirm that Dylan Covey still is able to be controlled by the team and is not going to be able to opt out and go to free agency. So I'm trying to confirm that. And then I'm trying to find that quote from Alex Anthopoulos. But we'll have that on the newsletter. Depending on the news from next week, it may be a segment on the show, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, you're listening on audio. Do us a favor, leave us a 5-star review. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you know when we drop that next episode, and maybe also leave us a 5-star review with some nice words of affirmation. That would be super great. Until next time, this has been Braves Today.